I know we've talked about this a couple times in the past, but just experiences at work and in my life in general have really given me a new appreciation and I guess kind of an understanding of this meme. And I just kind of wanted to talk about it again. So an NPC, for people who aren't really familiar with it, is a non-player character or a computer-controlled character in a video game. Now, generally speaking, the NPC will just be coded to have one set of lines they say. Either they'll say them during cutscenes or you'll go up and talk to them, and they might have a paragraph or two to say. And generally speaking, no matter how many times you talk to them or rewatch the cutscene, it's exactly the same, and there's no way to kind of interact with them. Some of them, if you talk to them a couple of times, they'll have a couple different things that they cycle through, but beyond that, they just don't really react to anything you do. And then in some games that are slightly more sophisticated, there might be a couple different options that you have, and the NPC will respond to the different options. But if you, there's no even way to do it. If you were going to try to ask them something else that they would not be programmed to respond to, they would just kind of stare at you or repeat one of their other phrases. And with regards to people, I think really the easiest way to identify someone who's an NPC is whether or not they react to external stimuli or react to external information. Or as I like to put it, would any amount of evidence, argumentation, or anything else change your viewpoint on not just this issue, but really on any issue? And if the answer is no, then they're probably an NPC. Granted that there are some moral convictions you do and should hold, but in a lot of cases, you should at least be willing to consider another idea enough to try to come up with a counter to it, or maybe say, okay, that's a decent point. I still don't think it is relevant, or I don't think it outweighs the benefits or outweighs the costs of something. But someone who's an NPC will not even have a response to it. They'll just, generally speaking, repeat something that they previously heard, normally on the media or something on Facebook or something one of their a politician they like told them, and it doesn't matter what else you bring up. I know something I've gotten into arguments with people over is I will quote things, quote facts, and they'll be like, well, that's from like alt-right or far-right media. And I'm like, it's from CBC. They're like, well, CBC is far-right media now, I guess. And they'll just ignore it, or they'll be like, what kind of conspiracy theorist are you quoting? And I'm like, it's on um, MSNBC or the New York Times or City TV or that other Canadian news channel I don't remember. And even though they're demanding that you provide them with a source from one of the places they trust, if you provide them with that source, they will just ignore it. And they will say, because like CBC said this, the other thing CBC said, it can also just not be true. And it's just too difficult, and their brains will just be completely incapable of processing it. Another, I guess, kind of way you can identify an NPC is someone who doesn't have a coherent system of values in multiple contexts. So, what I mean by that is they will say, particularly when Bush was in power, war's bad, America invading countries is bad, we want national self determination, we want peace, that kind of thing. And they will maintain that. And if you, some people have changed their mind and say Bush was awesome now, but a lot of them will still say, oh, this stuff was bad. And they will say, well, Donald Trump is like this because I don't like him, so he must be a warmonger. And if I happen to hint that I support Trump, they're like, why do you support Trump? I will try to appeal to that anti-war, anti-violence, anti-gun instinct with them and say, well, Trump didn't start as many wars as Obama or Bush did. He didn't start Obama started the Libyan war. He got America involved in Yemen. The Syrian civil war happened and they got involved in that. Bush invaded Iraq and Afghanistan and that went on. And Trump was able to wind a couple of those down. And with the exception of a couple lame missile strikes, didn't really get that involved in the Syrian civil war aside from bombing ISIS. And you can say that to them, and they might have been somebody who spent the entirety of the Bush administration protesting Bush, but they will just not be able to compute that. And they'll either take a pro-war position, or when I was arguing with someone, they said, "Well, Trump is more violent because he's kind of an asshole." And it doesn't matter whether or not he started wars. He's a violent person because he says mean things. And I'm not even trying to be facetious or mock the position. That's generally speaking what people will say to me is even if Obama objectively started more wars and killed more people and conducted more foreign drone strikes, he is a less violent and more of a man of peace than Trump because Trump, we're told by the media, is a bad person. You also see in how protective tariffs were widely popular with the left during the 90s and 2010s. And once Obama came to power and the left embraced neoliberalism, you can bring that up. You can say that Trump's tariffs is more pro-tariff than the Democrats, and is more interested in protecting American jobs than the Democrats. But they will just ignore that, and they'll say he's a Republican. Republicans are against the working class. Republicans are against the middle class. They're just puppets of the rich. I guess kind of a similar concept is the idea that Biden was like an underdog and that Trump was like an insider, even though Trump is like a businessman who hasn't made his career in politics, and Joe Biden's been in politics his entire adult life, and he was endorsed by the entire establishment of of corporations, the media, entertainment, even a lot of Republicans. All those people endorsed him, but they still view him as an outsider and a guy who is going to change the system and stuff like that. And it doesn't matter how many things you show them, it doesn't matter what you tell them or anything like that. They are completely incapable of changing any of their opinions in response to external information, in response to arguments. They aren't even capable of defending their position. Um, Oftentimes they won't even defend it with regards to the talking points they've been given. And like I said, if you accept the premise of their argument that like Trump attacking Syria with the missile strikes was bad, and you try to apply that into another situation, they can't understand like the concept of equivalency or broader principles or anything like that. It's a very strange concept to me, the idea that you're not even willing to consider ideas that aren't yours. And that's not to say like you don't think people are evil with their ideas. It doesn't mean you have to compromise. It doesn't mean you have to be a sensible centrist. But I do think it's a natural, if you have any degree of intellectual honesty, you have to occasionally go, okay, that's an interesting point. Does it make sense? Do I have an answer for this within my worldview or not? I think another maybe kind of the final aspect I want to discuss is kind of the goldfish thing. There's this there's a common, I'm not sure how accurate it is, but that goldfish have no short or long term memory or like no concept of object permanence. So once something leaves their view, they don't understand that it still exists and they can't remember it, and they won't reference it in any kind of decision making in the future. This applies very strongly to history. So, I, of course, completely accept YouTube's terms of service. I maintain that there's never been election fraud in the history of America. But it is interesting because I've been reading a bunch of books about the Gilded Age and the antebellum and 19th century. And these are by mainstream historians, these aren't by like right wing cranks. And they will frequently reference Tammany Hall. They'll reference the corrupt bargain. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, the corrupt bargain took place during the election of 1824, wherein Andrew Jackson won a clear victory in terms of the popular vote, but failed to get a majority of the Electoral College. Now, if no one gets a majority of the Electoral College, then the House of Representatives has to decide who becomes the next president. However, only they can only pick from the top three. Now, Henry Clay at the time controlled the House of Representatives, and his original goal was to come in third place and get himself elected. So, what he wound up doing is he made a deal with John Quincy Adams that he would elect John Quincy Adams as president if he got made Secretary of State and as kind of his de facto successor. Now, this is a widely accepted historical thing. What I also find interesting is on my video on Emperor Palpatine and the Operation Shadowhand, YouTube posted a link to the wiki article for QAnon. I don't know what QAnon has to do with Palpatine. That's some interesting deep lore there. But they considered Wikipedia to be a legitimate enough source to direct people towards. But if you look at Wikipedia, they will have articles on the corrupt bargain of 1824. They will also have it on the corrupt bargain of 1876, which is where there's this was during the end of Reconstruction when a lot of the southern states were still occupied and controlled by the military to varying degrees. And the election was extremely close, and the electoral votes of the three southern states that would determine who won the election of 1876 were all in doubt. And so the deal that more or less was made is that the Southerners, in particular the Southern Democrats, would accept Hayes as president, even if he didn't necessarily win. And in exchange, Hayes would remove the remaining soldiers from the South, and there would be no interference in video game journalism going forward. So, however, we're told that that did not happen. That is a conspiracy theory. And all these books by like mainstream historians that were written prior to the 2020 election are all far-right conspiracy theories, even if the people write them are avowed liberals who have always voted Democrat. And that's just the kind of like goldfish thinking you have. I also think it's interesting in that case that YouTube maintains there was no mass disenfranchisement of people or selective vote counting ever in a presidential election. And that would include elections prior to the Civil Rights Act when Southern blacks couldn't vote. So I guess they're also saying that Martin Luther King is like a QAnon conspiracy theorist. I guess kind of another one that really springs to mind is the whole John McCain thing. I don't know if a lot of you are old enough or were interested in politics, but when McCain was running against Obama, sure, there was a couple people who said he was a maverick on social and economic issues, but liberals were slamming the guy as being a warmongering psychopath who was going to start a nuclear war with Iran and wanted to invade Syria, wanted to invade Iran, wanted to invade North Korea, and would lead to a series of endless wars on top of America's existing endless wars, and was just kind of a, like I said, a psychopath. And when McCain died, he was this great patriot, he was this great hero, he was the greatest man in American history, the greatest senator in American history. And all the liberals said, we always loved John McCain. Even when he said he was like the most dangerous man to ever run for president. Even when we said he was like Barry Goldwater 2.0. It's just a goldfish thing. It's we can't remember things that happened like before last week. We can't remember anything prior to like the last 5 minutes, which is kind of where the whole current year meme comes from. But hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully you learned something from it and thought it was interesting. God bless everyone, and I'll talk to you again real soon.